It's the movie everyone is talking about.
The Sound of Freedom.
The Sound of Freedom.
The Sound of Freedom.
The Sound of Freedom.
How exactly did the small but mighty Angel Studios take down Indiana Jones at the box office? And will its message outrun skeptical media outlets? Also, the Synod on Synodality had some controversial picks, to say the least. And is being in shape far right?
What?
All this and more on this week's edition of the LOOPcast. God bless everyone. Welcome back to the LOOPcast, where we talk faith, culture, and politics from a Catholic perspective. I am here with Erica and Josh, and I'm fresh off of a movie screening. I went to see the movie Sound of Freedom last night. It's very fresh on my mind, and it's abundantly clear to me how it outperformed expectations. And this is not only just a case that I would hope everyone would want to spread as far as possible, but the story of how it was created, the cultural impact it's having, and some of the criticisms against it make for a really interesting segment here on the LOOPcast. So I did a lot of the research on it. You know, usually I pass it to Erica at this point, but I'll lay down some of the groundwork here, some of the railways, and we can then have some commentary from Josh and Erica. So this is the story of a guy, Tim Ballard. He worked for Department of Homeland Security, and he is now the founder and CEO of Operation Underground Railroad. And essentially what Operation Underground Railroad does, they run these sting operations and bring a lot of awareness to human trafficking, specifically child trafficking. And when we talk about what happens when trafficking, it could be anything from forced labor to sex trafficking. It's the complete depths of hell. And it's something that's really uncomfortable and not a lot of people like talking about in polite society for good reason. I mean, it's a really hard concept to grasp that your children could potentially be sucked into this world. And so that's why he felt so convicted to start this thing, because formerly he was working with the Department of Homeland Security, and then he decided, instead of just going after the people who are the perpetrators, I need to save some of these kids. And so the movie was legitimate. I mean, I saw it last night, production value fantastic. It was put on by an organization called Angel Studios. And an interesting thing about Angel Studios is that it is crowd-funded. And I remember when they launched this, because if you recognize Angel, it actually started off as VidAngel, which took the bad parts out of movies. So they would kind of censor movies with just dumb scenes so that you could actually, put it in front of your kids and have them enjoy the good parts of it. And so they crowdfunded.
Hollywood hated
and
that.
Hollywood hated it.
Hollywood hated it.
And guess what? They hate them a little bit more today, because
they sure do.
If you want to take a look at outperforming, so Indiana Jones, the I don't know, 6 Indiana Jones is like they're obsessed with making these things. It had a budget of $300 million just about, and that's a safe estimate. I don't even think that includes marketing. It released at the same time, same weekend as Sound of Freedom. Sound of Freedom had a $14.5 million budget. So when you talk about disparity, there it is.
Dwarf. Yeah.
David and Goliath here.
Right, David and Goliath. And Sound of Freedom actually outperformed Indiana Jones and the Disney money, posting, I believe, about $14 million on opening weekend, with Indiana Jones doing about $12 million.
Think about this. This is what I'm saying. Like, Hollywood, all these big studios, they make certain chess moves. And so if Disney says, hey, July 4th weekend, we're going to put down our marker and we're going to put our Indiana Jones franchise movie, boom, we're going to do it that weekend. So other studios are like, okay, well, if they're going to do that one, let's make our big movie Memorial Day weekend or another weekend so we don't try to interfere. They all want to make more money, and so they kind of go through these motions. And so how did it happen? How did it come to be that you would end up with a movie on this 4th of July week, right, that would be presumably huge? Indiana Jones, massive franchise. And then it would tank because it's so woke, right? It's like God orchestrated all these moves to have a terrible movie bomb at the box office so that this other movie, right, could do so well and be number one with like a tiny shoestring budget compared to all these other movies. So it's just, you look at how things go and like, was that just a coincidence?
No.
Or?
And it was the string of a lot of unusual, like Jim Caviezel talked about this, how many obstacles there were to actually getting this movie made, because Tim Ballard was approached by studios. I think he founded Underground Railroad in 2014, and then as soon as 2015, he was getting approached by major studios to have the rights to the movie. And I was reading up on this, and actually he brought his wife to all the pitches. Smart man. And he said he trusts his wife and her instincts more than he trusts himself. And so after all the big studios, Disney, et cetera, came to him, his wife said no to all of them. She said no. And she just said, with something like this, and Tim was on the same page, it needs to be done right. And it's really tricky. And as we've kind of seen in the news, a lot of these studios are, unfortunately, executives are complicit in a lot of these type of things. And so along comes, I think in 2018, it didn't start filming until 2018, but along comes Angel Studios. And she said, as soon as Angel Studios gave them the pitch, she said yes. And one of his things that he said I needed to happen, he wanted Jim Caviezel to play him, which was kind of funny because obviously, Passion of the Christ, Point of Interest, huge actor. And
also extremely handsome. I mean, I'd be like, yeah, he can play me in a movie, obviously.
Well, I mean, a huge actor, Tom, but I would also say, since the Passion of the Christ, he has been, to a certain extent blacklisted by Hollywood. I mean, he had Person of Interest on TV as a series, but, he's really suffered in his career for taking on projects that are, about Jesus Christ or...
He suffered in his career after that movie and also during it. I mean, you remember the story that he got hit by lightning while he's on the cross? Talk about bearing your cross.
Right, and I have a quote
awesome.
here. This is from Tim himself, and I thought this really perfectly summed up the whole story. So he said, there was something special about Jim when I watched him in The Count of Monte Cristo. Great movie, by the way.
Throwback, high school. Hey.
Great movie, by the way.
Yeah.
There was a light to me that came out of him. It was important to us that whoever played this role had to be someone that willfully did it with God and knew that light has to come out because we don't want this to just be a movie. We want this to be a movement. We want this to be something that saves kids and warns would-be traffickers and pedophiles that we're coming.
I love that. I love it. I'm like, I'll go buy out a whole theater. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the guy Tim Ballard in real life, total bad A. He is the epitome of courage, sacrifice, heroism. The movie was so inspirational, but the story in real life is almost even crazier. He quit his job at the DHS, went over to Colombia, and saved 110 kids from sex trafficking, all by himself and some people he's working with in Colombia. And I can't say enough. You guys got to see this movie. It was so well done. It was super professional. It gripped you the whole time. And the crazy thing about it was based on a true story. Like, it would have been good enough as a fictional movie, and yet you just sit there and you're like, how could this possibly
be a real person?
Real?
One of my favorite interviews I saw was with Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel sitting down together, actually with Jordan Peterson, whose voice is a little grating for some of us to listen to, but he really pulled some neat material out of the two of them with his questions. And Jim Caviezel made a comment at one point. He was like, yeah, I read the script and I thought to myself, I get to play a real life superhero. Why would I go for like a Marvel superhero or an Avenger? Why would I be one of them when I could portray a real hero? And this guy, boots on the ground. Another interview I saw with Ballard, he was talking about his work right now. He's in West Africa, and he documents all of his sting operations. So everything is documented, everything is on film, and anyone can research it. And he's just talking about how stunning it is to him that with all of the documentation his organization has done, how little attention it still gets in the legacy media, from government organizations, et cetera. So, it's been really interesting to watch the interviews come out around this film with Dr. Ballard. Really cool.
And that, I think, is something that we need to discuss here as well. Pay close attention to the people who are maligning this movie.
The freak out.
Because...
oh my gosh.
This is real. It's all documented. The movie itself, and even like the idea that there is child trafficking going on around the world, specifically sex trafficking, has been called a right-wing QAnon conspiracy. And I want to make this very clear because the attacks on this movie have been so shocking to me, but I want to call it as I see it. At first, the attacks on the movie were child trafficking is a QAnon right-wing conspiracy just used to rile people up. And then as soon as the numbers come out, people are starting to see the resources, people are seeing the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
they moved the goalpost on that to, oh, well, Jim Caviezel is a conspiracy theorist. Look at this quote from 2 years ago about him talking about something that's controversial. So they can't discredit the movie anymore. And then
so they go after the man. They go after
correct.
the people. Right.
And Erica,
exactly.
you have an article that you would
favorite.
like to bring up. I mean,
this was Rolling Stone's headline, and I hope everyone enjoys this as much as I did. So the headline for the Rolling Stone review was "Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brain worms." That's for you, Josh. And the subtitle was, "The QAnon-tinged thriller about child trafficking is designed to appeal to the conscience of a conspiracy-addled boomer." A conspiracy-addled boomer. That's you, Tom, I guess? I don't know.
yeah.
But I was like, it's ridiculous.
I probably have more brain worms
The
than
smear
Josh.
job.
Josh has got more of a solid brain than me, I think. But
I'm like, which is more brain wormed, to like go and see a movie about a real life like sting operation in the jungles of Colombia, and at our southern border is actually portrayed, pretty critically in the film and in real life.
Also interesting, I'm pretty sure that Rolling Stone wrote a few articles about how great the movie Cuties was, if you remember that controversy back in the day. I was just going to
point that out. Which one's more brain-wormed, Sound of Freedom or Cuties?
About 12-year-olds twerking.
12-year-olds doing exotic dancing.
Take note who's criticizing this and keep a close eye on them, and probably don't let them around your children is what I would recommend. But a lot of bizarre things happening in theaters. I saw some, and I actually, when I went to the theater, I had this on my mind. I've seen some cases of people saying that they bought a ticket online and it was a packed theater, like ran out, and then when they got there, it was empty. I saw some examples, coordinated examples of air conditioners being broken. Just really weird stuff going on. So when I went, I was like, I wonder what it's going to be like. And we're now a good week past opening weekend, completely packed. I mean, I went to the theater. They were turning people away. People were coming, hoping to just slide in. I went to a 7:30 showing, and it was completely packed. I mean,
on a weeknight too.
Yeah, on a weekend. Yeah. It was crazy.
We had to order our tickets like 5 days in advance in Connecticut. I was like, surely in Connecticut, no one's going to care because they've all read Rolling Stone here. But no, it's impossible to get a ticket, even in Connecticut.
See, not even Connecticut do people read Rolling Stone.
So there you go.
I think like in terms of performance and just looking at what Angel Studio's doing, I think so much of the marketing on this is so smart with such a shoestring budget. But what happened was, at the end of the movie, they had a direct appeal from Jim Caviezel talking about how the movie's not about him, it's not about Tim, it's about saving these children. It's about creating a movement to make people more aware. And so they had something called Pay It Forward, where you could actually buy a ticket for someone who maybe couldn't afford it, or you could take a ticket that someone had already paid for and just get it to people. They didn't want money to be in the way of people seeing the message. And so I could see, after watching that and feeling all the emotions of watching this film, I mean, especially as a father myself, like I felt super convicted. I could see how this could continue to get bigger somehow, like somehow bigger than the opening week, because I've had so many people tell me like, Tom, you got to see this movie. You got to see this movie. And how many movies have you guys seen where people, I can't think of many, maybe Top Gun Maverick, just because it was the first movie back from COVID, but that was all fake. Like, this is crazy. Like, this is based on a true story. So, yeah. And then I want to take this opportunity too, because this is what the movie is about, and unfortunately it's real. So I found a lot of statistics, and there's a lot of good organizations out there. I'm specifically referring to the Polaris Project today. They are a human trafficking hotline. They're considered an authority on statistics. So just some things to keep in mind for everyone listening. Human trafficking is a $150 billion, billion with a B, a year industry worldwide. So this is 3 times the NFL. The United States is number 1 in the world for sex trafficking, because all the money's here, which is unfortunately the case, and loose morals, apparently. More than 50% of victims in America are between the ages of 12 and 15.
Oof.
And the movie did a really good job of portraying this, but I mean, we're talking about young, innocent children, some even younger than 12. I mean, crazy. So people that profit from this, people who are actively involved in the trade, people who purchase children, we're talking about people who have a lot of money across the world. And this movie was made, mind you, before the Epstein thing. So that basically broke, I think, to a lot of people, like, whoa, this is actually a real problem. And it's crazy because even in the movie, I don't want to spoil it, but there were certain elements that are like, oh, I feel like they modeled this after the Epstein scandal, and it wasn't. This is all before this came out. Also child pornography. A lot of child pornography is actually made based on sex trafficking, which is disgusting and vile, but people profit off of that. And then there's a lot of officials and enforcement that are kind of complicit in receiving these bribes. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about domestically. And go check out the Polaris Project. There's a lot of good resources. I want everyone to be aware because awareness is huge on this because it happens in your backyard. It could happen in Nicaragua. It could happen in your backyard. So the southern border, the U.S. southern border, I want to throw out some stats here. So in 2022, this is all based on official government statistics. 60% of unaccompanied minors crossing the border have been caught by cartels and are forced into forced labor, child pornography, or drug trafficking. In 2022, the southern border received 752 unaccompanied minors per day. Per day. That's in 2022. So we're not even talking 2023 yet.
Right. And we know why this happens. I mean, this is not that hard to say because we have a debate in this country on immigration, and people say, well, you can't turn people away. We can't turn these kids away. And so what you've done is created an incentive where smugglers who are like, well, if you cross the country with a minor, then even if it's not your kid, they won't know it's not your kid, and so they can't turn you back.
Right.
So it's more valuable to have these younger children smuggled across the border. Therefore, more children are smuggled across the border.
And just to point out too, that the story broke just this past spring that the Biden administration has lost track of how many was it? 85,000 of these children have just come into our country, and they've just lost track of them. And we don't know where they are. They're somewhere in here.
And remember how much of a scandal it was when that happened in the Trump administration?
Right, kids in
and
cages.
The media covered it ad nauseum, but then it's just sort of forgotten.
Yep.
They covered the cages part, and then when the kids were unaccompanied across the country, you mean the Trump administration lost track of these children? And now what happens in the Biden administration is it's crickets. Again, the media, it's to say this hypocritical is not, doesn't matter.
It's an economy of pedophilia. It's a policy of allowing pedophilia, and I'm so happy this movie is out and shedding light on it and pointing to that. Needs more attention.
It does no one any good to have a border this unsecure.
Yeah. And I don't care what administration it is. I don't care if it's the Trump administration. I don't care if it's the Biden administration.
Yeah,
we need, and shame on all of our elected officials who could actually do something about this, do their job, legislate, have a coherent border strategy. It's literally like exacerbating this. Another stat from the movie, there's more humans in slavery across the world right now than when slavery was legal.
It's like there's more slavery today than there was during our Civil War. Right.
And you know what I think is not helping this is whenever, so like CatholicVote, for example, we FOIA'd the government to find out the involvement, what the government's involvement is with Catholic charities at the border. And we were absolutely maligned for suing nuns, which is, first off, not what happened.
Which we did not do.
Which we never did. But anytime there's any inquiry into what's going on at the border to try to root out some corruption, the politicization of like, oh, well, we think they're coming from this angle, so we're going to slam them from this angle. Like, this is, like, after watching this movie, I just am so frustrated that we can't get beyond that because I'm just seeing, it helped you really see the real effects of that.
Don't we want to know what's going on the border?
Right. I think it's actually a moral responsibility of Americans to know what's going on at the border. So, yeah, go see the movie. I can't recommend it enough. I think this is one of those things where it's gonna have long legs because it is a movement type movie. And shout out to Tim Ballard. Shout out to Jim Caviezel. Shout out to the director. He did a fantastic job.
And shout out to Angel Studios too. Shout out to all the guys there for the good week, the good work. I can't talk. The good work they're doing. Shout out there.
Yeah. So let's bring us up here. So Josh has a story for us, and I'll let you tell it,
Story
Josh.
time with Josh.
Well, hey, I was at my neighbor's birthday party, and lo and behold, who shows up? Spider-Man. Yeah, so it was a big deal. I mean, the 5-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, they're all going crazy because he was in the whole costume and everything, and he's making all these moves and showing them how to shoot the webs and all this stuff, and that was great. And well, the kids love that. And then, after he's doing all the birthday fun with the kids, and he goes off, and he comes back and changes into civilian clothes, And he's like, hey, man, I just want to let you know, I love the Loopcast. I listen every week.
Peter Parker loves us.
So listen. If Peter Parker listens to the Loopcast every week and loves it, you can leave us a review. So the best way that you can help the program right now, go on Apple Podcasts, go on Spotify, go wherever you can. Send us an email. Leave us a review. It takes 2 seconds. Throw us 5 stars. If Peter Parker loves it, you can too. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate it. I just love hearing little stories like that, Josh.
That's
It's just
awesome.
like the reach of this program continues to amaze me. So we even got to Brooklyn and the mean streets of Brooklyn with Spider-Man. So now we move on to a synod talk. So for those confused, it's okay. It is confusing. We're going to try to make it a little less confusing. There's some names dropped of who's going to be attending the synod, and it's stirred up some controversy within the Catholic world. Thankfully, we have Erica to explain it all to us. Erica.
Yep.
what's going
So, Pogo, while you were in the wilds of Wisconsin enjoying your tech-free vacation, congratulations.
awesome.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
The delegation of bishops are the prelates that Pope Francis has now handpicked to represent the American Church at the Synod of Synod coming up this fall, was announced. The names were dropped. Now, before I go into the names of the personally picked guys, we're going to talk about the original delegation of bishops. So the USCCB elected their own representatives from the United States to attend the synod, and they are, rightfully so, Archbishop Timothy Broglio, who's the president of the USCCB, Bishop Daniel Flores of Brownsville, Bishop Robert Barron of Winona, Rochester, and Word on Fire fame, Bishop Kevin Rhodes of Fort Wayne, South Bend, and Cardinal Timothy Dolan from New York. Now, they were the original delegation. The Vatican, however, has also invited some other characters, including now Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago, Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, D.C., and Cardinal Robert McElroy, who we've mentioned on this program, and, of course, our dear friend, Father James Martin, controversial founder of Outreach, which we wrote an expose on. You can check it out. I will drop it in the show notes. So you can imagine that the Catholic news world was, pretty a lot of disturbing, a lot of feelings around this announcement. That it seems like, what does this mean? What does the Pope mean by these handpicked appointments who are, clearly of a certain school of thought among the American Episcopates?
I mean, you're being nice about it.
I am.
here, Erica.
Okay, it's just a disaster.
Give me a break.
Like, this is awful.
Think about you'd be hard pressed to find 4 Catholic churchmen in the country that are worse than Cupich,
Okay.
McElroy, James Martin,
Thank you, Josh.
and Wilton Gregory.
I was trying
the worst
to
of
be,
the worst.
Yeah, you're right.
As they say in the one the worst. And let's remember, Pope Francis promoted Cupich out of, no offense to the good people of Spokane, Washington, okay? But he was a small diocese, plucks him out of a small little pasture and puts him in Chicago. And McElroy for San Diego, I'm never going to let this go.
We touched a nerve, I think.
So the Pope just put down 21 new cardinals, and again, Archbishop Gomez of Los Angeles is denied a red hat, and he gives the red hat to San Diego's lefty, Robert McElroy, and of course, Father James Martin, who is an evangelist for all things LGBTQ, ABC, whatever.
Two-Spirit.
He's now, and he's been given a plum little position at the Vatican, and of course, he's appointed to the Synod of the boring,
Meeting of
boring,
meetings.
meeting.
Committee on the committee.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
It's a disaster. Frustrating.
But okay, so let's get back though, because
Get back on the fact here.
People are frustrated, and
They should be.
as they should be. And then Bishop Barron went and said that, tried to explain what the synod was essentially. And so, Erica, if you could clarify, what did Bishop Barron say,
Mhm.
and then can we clarify the statement?
All right. So Bishop Barron, after, all of this is going on and these names are dropped, he did an interview with Fox in which he urged Catholics to remember what the synod is, right? The synod is an advisory council. He said, quote, "It is not a democratic process," end quote, "to change church teaching," as it has been portrayed basically in the media. And he said, quote, "I'll take the Pope at his word. I don't think we're discussing doctrine," said he. But then he also said, "We're kind of going to all sit around a table and talk about church teaching and what we think about it."
Listen, I think it's an admirable thing for Bishop Barron to try to play a little damage control and try to make sure people aren't too upset about it. It's like, hey, it's still going to be the Catholic Church. Like, that's always encouraging, by the way. We're going to have this meeting, and we promise we won't completely destroy church teaching. Oh, boy.
Well,
Gee,
okay,
thanks.
so that's a point.
The biggest
Josh,
problem, I think...
let's hear from Erica real quick.
That's a point. Because I think it is really important for Catholics to remember what a synod is and what a synod is not, right? And a synod is not an ecumenical council. And an ecumenical council is on the authority of the bishops gathered, the representatives, the authority in there comes ultimately from God, right? Through the Pope, from God, while the authority of the members of a synod comes from the electors, the people who choose them to join the synod. So a synod and a council are not the same thing as far as the church is concerned, right? And the difference lies in the authority. So whatever comes out of the synod, it does not have the authority in the church to change doctrine. So here's the issue, though. Will church teaching change? No, it won't. Don't bear me out. Will scandal happen, and will souls be potentially lost as a result of this scandal? That is the concern.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. That's the distinction. And I think, too, like for me, I'm thinking about history. Catholics, we are at a point in history where Catholics are not equipped to handle the scandal that these men invited to this synod are in a position to promulgate, because we are the worst catechized in the West. We have no idea what our faith teaches. We have no clue about our history. We are untethered from our patrimony. I mean, in a way, we're worse off. It's like the Arian heresy when, 3/4 of the world's bishops were Arians. They were literally heretics. I'm talking like we are back in the 300s and 400s here in terms of the education of the Catholic people. We are pre-monastic schools. We're like French peasants during the Albigensian heresy. So I'm calling on a new St. Dominic.
Right.
Can we get a new St. Dominic here?
Well, here's the thing. Like, there's a lot of conservative type Catholics who will take the words of Bishop Barron as a warm, comfy blanket and say, see, the church is prevented from doing horrible heresies and performing evils. I'm not saying that you're saying that, Erica, but here's the problem. That alone isn't fantastic, okay? I mean, just because you prevent the church from doing something evil doesn't mean that is a great times. Like, the story of the last 50, 60 years of the United States, of the church in the West, not just the United States, has been promulgation of that contraception, right? And the sexual revolution. So the sexual revolution comes at the church, and the church kind of blinks. The church doesn't actually say, yes, contraception is morally okay or whatever. But essentially, so many of the priests in this country kind of turn the other way and then make a big deal about it, never preached about it, never talked about it. And so you have a de facto, quote, policy where it's just like sort of understood that no one really cares about it. And that's also horrible. My biggest thing is, so just to get an understanding of it, so when John Paul gets elected in 1978, so you have John Paul from 78 and then Benedict, until he quits.
May he rest in peace.
You have these two conservative, I mean, I hate to use the word even conservative. They're
just
Catholic.
Orthodox, right?
And they actually mean it, they teach it, they promulgate it, and they were doing they're trying to reform a church which was so scattered in many different ways and distracted and not singing from the right hymnal and trying. So they were going about the business of reforming things, and it's a long slog. And that's my biggest frustration with Francis is, of course, he thinks this was all a mistake, and he's not continuing this reform that was started by John Paul and Benedict.
Interrupting the slog, right? Prolonging the slog. Just to add to that, aside from doctrinal confusion, well, not even aside, I think as a result of doctrinal confusion, these men that Francis has personally handpicked to go to the synod, McElroy, Gregory, Supich, they have significant ties to Teddy McCarrick. Theodore McCarrick, no longer a cardinal, no longer anything really in the church, but the cover-ups of the abuse scandal and the infiltration of our seminaries, by the trans agenda, by wokeism, it's perpetuating that, and it's rewarding these men who protected McCarrick and his like.
Yeah.
Especially McElroy.
Yeah.
Of all those that you mentioned, for sure he was the worst on that.
Justice and judgment will come to them one day, and it's important to see the game, see the battlefield clearly, see the playing field clearly, without allowing anger to overtake you, because I think it is really easy to get angry about this, but at the same time, Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins, and he promised that he gave us opportunity after our sins while we're on earth to repent of them and to continually renew ourselves through that.
I think there's a place for righteous anger, right? I mean, Christ, when he's turning over the temple tables, when we're talking about the abuse of children, we're talking about seminarians whose vocations were just decimated by this culture. I think that there is a place for righteous anger. The difference, and I think this is what you're getting at, Tom, the difference is that righteous anger does not produce bitterness. Righteous anger does not produce schism. Righteous anger produces reform and renewal and this drive. So I think it's right to be angry in this case, because you've taken my father's house and made it a den of thieves, right?
Right.
Yes.
But it's not to turn us bitter. And when we find ourselves getting bitter, that's when we have to take a look at ourselves and do that self-examination.
Correct.
See, I feel it's important to try to show people we understand that the state of the church, and we're not going to, because I think in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, there's a little too much of the happy talk.
Springtime.
And I don't mean to pin all of it on George Weigel, but he deserves a chunk of that. But the whole thought was, everything is beautiful. It's getting better. Don't worry. We just got to wait these guys out.
Right,
and it's like, well, what happens if one of these liberal bishops gets elected pope? Hello.
Whoops.
So that kind of sets it back a little bit, doesn't it? But I agree with you that you can't allow your righteous anger, your justified frustration at seeing this beautiful house, that was built by Christ. You can't go to, look, I understand. Father James Altman is someone who also looked at the church and saw a lot of bad things going on. And I do worry that he became a little too bitter, because at a conference just this last week, it was a coalition for canceled priests. And he was someone who was canceled himself.
He suffered a lot. Yep, he has suffered a lot.
But he said, quote, "A real pope solely is responsible for defending the positive faith, not making it up according to his own personal ideology." Okay. Then he says, "Therefore, it is 100% valid to say Bergoglio," which is Pope Francis's name, "actually is an anti-pope. There have been 20 or so before him. He's the worst of them all." And unfortunately, I completely disagree with Father Altman. I think that's what, you get to be that bitter part. And there were some people in the audience that clapped and they were like trying to cheer him on and stuff like that. And I just think that I pray for Father James Altman. I understand some of the things he's seeing. He can be very frustrated with, but I agree you got to make sure we don't go that bitter path. It's not going to do because I am concerned about your own soul, not just the church. And I don't want you to get into that kind of vicious, kind of bitter cycle, because I think it can be very toxic to your own soul. And so I think we have to be careful. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you start thinking about this, like, how are we even equipped to be able to make such a call? Like, so I think we should just stay away from that whole discussion. He is the Pope, and he does a lot of things that are very frustrating, and we should be frank about that. Some people are like, how could you ever criticize? Look, I don't want to go be a crank and criticize all the time. But when someone does something, that doesn't make sense, you should say, hey, what's going on here? But I think we got to be very careful not to become bitter.
Well, and
Completely
just to point out too that the premise of the synod on synodality is Pope Francis saying he wants to hear from the laity and he wants to hear feedback, and bishops now want to hear from us. So it's not shutting up and stay sweet and pray and obey and all that.
Unless you attended traditional Latin Mass, by the way, then shut up and
go
away.
away.
I think it was actually on Pints with Aquinas when Strickland went on. He was talking about why he admired St. Thomas more, and he saw him as kind of a model for how to handle modern scandal. And he said what he admired about him was he always held true to his faith. He never wavered. He never publicly denounced anything or created scandal. But when scandal was happening around him, he didn't basically just say, all right, chop my head off. Like he's like, okay, just end it. Chop my head off. I'm going to heaven, which he could have done. He kind of as Strickland described, bobbed and weaved a little bit and tried all the available avenues, especially as a lawyer, he knew this very well, but he was tactful and clever about it. And then when it did come to the ultimate end, he was still prepared to give his life, but he tried everything possible, bobbing and weaving up until that point. And he said he saw that as kind of a model for how we should approach modern scandal in the church, in our country. It's to go nuclear option, to go Martin Luther option is a path that's been taken many times before. And it just doesn't seem to me like it's a very smart tactical move if you really want to see change within the Catholic Church. So that would just be, I thought that was good advice maybe to end us on there. So next up, we have the LOOPcast alumni, as I'm going to call him, Senator Tommy Tuberville from great state of Alabama. He's held the flag still up. He's holding the hill. For those unaware, he is holding up military nominations over the military funding abortion travel. And we've all, as a country, as support of majority of Americans, the government should not be paying for abortions. That's was agreed on. That just seemed like something we could all get on board with. And yet the government and the Biden administration has continued to try to get around that. And the latest is trying to sneak people to different states in which they can get abortions in that are in the military. And Tommy Tuberville said, absolutely not. I'm not going to be complicit in that. That's not what people elected me to do. And so he's just held out all nominations until something is done about that. And so cool to see, like, this keeps coming up in the LOOPcast because we interviewed him, I think a month ago now.
2 months.
And he's just continued to hold the hill. Like, there's sometimes where you do interviews with people and you know it's somewhat of a commentary on your program and you yourself because you've associated with them. And so it's so frustrating when you do this and you see them cave and you see them not hold up to the standard that they set on your program. And so this is just such a beautiful example of, like, he came on, he said what he's going to do. He's continued to do it. He hasn't given up. And I just want to commend him. Like, it's so cool to see a man with like that much conviction, keep holding it up.
Yeah, really great update. And we're at 250 appointments now in the military have been held up because the Department of Defense continues to fund service members' abortions, including abortion travel. And the reason it was in the news this week is because the Marine Corps Commandant David Berger retired on Monday. Commandant, thank you. General David Berger retired on Monday, leaving Assistant Commandant General Eric Smith as the acting leader of the Marine Corps. Smith needs to be confirmed by the Senate to become the official head of the Marine Corps, but because Tuberville has exercised his universal hold on appointments, Smith's confirmation could be delayed indefinitely. So the Marines are officially leaderless for the first time since 1859. When, get this, Commandant Archibald Henderson. What a name, Archibald. If only I could have one more. Archibald? Archibald? All right. I was going for
another coffee.
The classical pronunciation or something. Archibald Henderson. All right, I'm going to chug my coffee while we go on to the next segment there.
No, but it's good, though, that, like, you're right that he's staying true because the military-industrial complex is bipartisan in Washington, and there's a lot of money involved, and it's a big industry, and that's something that Eisenhower warned us about. And Tuberville's just like, no, you're violating federal law by giving service member money to go fly to another state to get them to abort their child. Either end this stupid policy that you started, which is in violation of federal law, or change the law, but you just don't get to make up federal law on your own. So I think that's great. God bless him.
Yep. God bless him. In the Loop, we have some stories that we can see generate more attention, generate more buzz. And one of the ones that really popped up on the radar was this article about letting your kids get bored, specifically in the summer. And it's just so easy now with technology, TV, phones, all that. It's just kind of an easy out. And it's kind of, the article talked about how it's not necessarily the job of the parent to be a, quote, cruise director for the kids, trying to like plan every minute of your kid's day to make sure that they're happy and entertained. It's not only bad for you, but it's bad for them. And so it made the argument for boredom. And I thought this would be a good opportunity. You guys are some veteran parents. My kid's pretty entertained, I'd say. He's pretty young. How do you guys approach summer, not having school, and that relationship of like not being the cruise director, but allowing your kids to have time to figure it out.
I think Teresa Barber's article is very good, and she points out a lot of things. It's like, get them bored so that they start becoming creative and try to come up with their own ideas. And I think the thing that she didn't elaborate on, the genius of why that is, which is when you have a tablet or watching TV or whatever, you're passive in nature. Or even if you're playing a game, it's like, here's a game that you will like. Here's a TV show that you will like. Here's a movie that you will like. And you're passively doing it. Okay? It's your nature. I guess video games are a little bit more active because you're interacting with it, but it's still inherently a passive thing. And that's why if you say, we do it at our house, tech time out, boom, all devices off, get outside, go. And we force the kids then to be adventurous, and they become the driver of their activity. They have to find a way to make themselves entertained. So they go out and start a bonfire, or they, make, they go fishing in a stream or whatever. I mean, I live in the country, so they have a little more options.
You can start bonfires where Josh lives, just so everyone knows he's not in like suburbia or anything.
Yeah, he doesn't light the neighbor's house on fire. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Ah, well,
Josh doesn't strike me as a city slicker. I don't think he's living in.
Yeah, it's a real gift to raise kids where there's more space outdoors for sure. I think it helps a lot. But I think the same principle can hold inside the home as well. I know like in the winter, we still let the kids be bored. And just to echo what Josh said, I think boredom, it's okay to feel bored. Like it's okay to end one activity and not have the next thing like right in your face right away. Those natural pauses throughout the day are just more human. And I think, it gives kids, it forces them to use their creativity or to just lie around and rest. That's fine too, as long as you're like not bothering anybody. But yeah, my husband and
Erica, you'll love this.
Yeah, tell me.
I saw this mom was like just desperate to get some stuff done around the house. And her husband had bought this appliance, and so that's always the biggest thing. You get like a microwave or a big refrigerator or something. You get these huge boxes. And so she took her two toddlers, put them in the box inside the cardboard box, and handed them a bunch of markers, and they just sat in this box, and they're just drawing all over the place.
I have done this.
She's like able to finally vacuum. It's like, thank the Lord, I can vacuum without 1,000 Legos on the floor. It was great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think too, I remember doing this with a couple of my toddlers. Probably I've done it multiple times, and then they end up coloring on each other. And you just gotta, if you're gonna let kids get bored so you can do your own thing, you gotta tolerate a little mess. So, my 6-year-old right now, her favorite thing is to go outside, and she turns over the rocks and the stones in our garden, and she finds bugs and worms, and she puts them in boxes, and she gets really, really dirty. But I have had 35 minutes of, peace and quiet so I can put the loop together or something.
Oh, give them a paintbrush and paint the rocks. Think how much time they can burn
or
with
even
that.
A bucket of water and several like bath toys, and just put them out in the front yard and be like, okay, that's it. Go do it.
So I don't know if this is funny or sad, but I probably identify a little bit more with the kids than the parents at this point. I am.
Oh, you're closer in age to them than to us. That's probably
closer
true.
in age, yeah. But I had very prudent parents that. Shout out to basements, by the way. Basements are the best.
Go to the
I know
basement.
that not everyone can have them.
This is our refrain.
But my parents were very wise, and they didn't. They like kind of barely finished the basement. If you're familiar, like unfinished basements have concrete floors and are like a little dangerous, but they basically put like a really thin carpet over it and made sure there's nothing like dangerous around. And they just, whenever they needed, us to go do stuff, like go to the basement, and trust me, like we beat up that basement, nicks everywhere, stuff all over the carpet. But like we played all kinds of sports, like, and then they waited until we got old enough. Like, all right, now we're going to finish the basement. I was like, you guys, smart, very smart. But I have to say too, it's funny, we're talking about this for kids, but I also have become more aware recently. I read this really interesting book called Digital Minimalism, and it's by this author, Cal Newport, who's also written a book called Deep Work that I think was a little bit more popular, but I enjoyed Deep Work, so I read Digital Minimalism. And the book just continued to reinforce the truth that many of these social media companies and technology companies, they make their money by you spending as much time as humanly possible on their services. So they make suggested, they feed you content, especially, and then they hyper target the algorithms to continue to give you what you like. And you might think, oh, that's a good thing. But like Josh was saying, the idea of being passive all the time, I think it's really dangerous, because you can be literally, from the second you wake up to the second you go to bed, a passive person. You can be passive at work. You could be passive in your free time. And so the book talked a lot about cultivating a really healthy leisure life that is not passive. And so I think when I was a kid, I was like, you know what, when I get older, there'll be someone that will like help me figure it all out, like my parents or whatever. And then like I hit adulthood, I'm like, oh, no one's coming to figure this out. Like I need to, if I'm frustrated about parts of myself, like I need to figure it out. And so I've really taken some, I guess some would consider extreme actions to like dumb down my phone, for example. Like I pretty much on my phone, I can only use text, phone call. I think I have Spotify, and then that's pretty much it. Because I just realized that if it's there, it's a temptation. And then it just instantly, the moment I get bored, it can just make me passive. And then that's what I know I'm going to be kind of hardwired to do. And I want to try to be more active, specifically in my home life as well. Like I got my son's right in front of me, my wife's right in front of me. There's things I know that I can do around the house. There's, I could go exercise, or we can go outside. Like there's just things I can do actively that are actually going to fill me up, make me happier, and make me healthier, really. So, not to hijack this and make it about adulthood. It applies to adulthood too.
Mm-hmm.
Like this isn't just for your
Absolutely.
kids.
Absolutely. That was good. That was all the good, Tom.
Good. Yeah. And I'm not perfect, but that's something I think about a lot.
Incredible insights, considering you've only been an adult for about 10 months.
Yeah.
That's
Congratulations, Pogo.
Thank you. To tie this into Catholicism, you can't experience God when you're constantly distracted. And I know that's something that like seems almost corny at this point, but you can experience God at any point in the day, but you need to be bored, quote unquote. You need to be passive or not passive. You need to be active in where you are, like completely in your shoes. And then you can start to experience God in the world around you, and the people around you, and the nature around you. And that's a huge insight.
So you're right, though. Like the tech guys, they want to give you that dopamine hit. They want to keep you hooked. They want to this and then that. And so that's what you're getting at. You need to break from that addiction, break from that stupor.
It's like break from the Matrix almost. Right. Like I've almost been describing like a lot of what's going on around me is kind of like the Matrix. And then when you break from the Matrix, you start realizing you look at other people who are in the Matrix, and you're like, oh my gosh, you just realize you're a little bit different now, or you're thinking about it a little bit different. But until you're consciously aware of that reality, you can't point it out, or you can't even.
Yeah, you don't have to be physically hooked up in the Matrix you're physically to your head when you're just doing this all the time.
Yeah,
with their phone.
It's crazy. Go take a walk with no headphones in and no phone, and it's unbelievable looking at people. Like everyone's looking at a screen. It's crazy.
You feel kind of weird. Yeah, one of the best pieces of advice I got when we were first parents, like when my two oldest were born, I think, was this whole the idea of letting kids be bored and giving them a lot of space to just tinker around was actually a sort of training for contemplation, right? And it's making space in their lives as children to hear the voice of God, to just sort of spontaneously raise their minds to Him. And that if you have kids who are just like on the cruise all the time, to use the article's terminology, if mom's the cruise director and every moment is scheduled all summer long, a child doesn't have time to just encounter the world as God made it and as He's reaching out to them. So it's like, parents, let go a little bit, make space for God. Same in your adult life.
Twilight Zone. This was a good week for Twilight. Erica, you're up.
Yeah, speaking of the Matrix, so I'm not even going to try and we are going back to the Synod, sort of DEI hijacking of the church a little bit, but we're going to turn our attention to World Youth Day, which is coming up in a couple of weeks in Lisbon, Portugal. And the bishop in Lisbon, Bishop Americo Aguiar, he made a statement this week about sort of the mission of World Youth Day and the point and why youth from all over the world should come. And I'm not going to try and introduce this. I'm just going to read what he said, and I think that'll do us in. He said, "We don't want to convert the young people to Christ or to the Catholic Church or anything like that at all. The goal of World Youth Day is to enable each young person to say, quote, I think differently, I feel differently, I organize my life in a different way, but we are brothers and we go together to build the future." Left out the sisters there, so I'm offended. And this is the main message of this encounter with the living Christ that the Pope wants to provide to young people. Here we go, the kicker. We don't want to convert the young people to Christ or to the Catholic Church or anything like that at all. He continued, we want it to be normal for a young Catholic Christian to say and bear witness to who he is, or for a young Muslim, Jew, or of another religion to also have no problem saying who he is and bearing witness to it, and for a young person who has no religion to feel welcome and to perhaps not feel strange for thinking in a different way. So, newsflash, World Youth Day, founded by Pope John Paul II, whose message to youth was be not afraid to take the world for Jesus Christ, has now become just... really lukewarm turtle
He must
soup
have rolled over. He must have rolled over his grave when he heard that.
It's just a trip. It's just going on a vacation now, right?
Yeah.
If you're not gonna, if it's not about Jesus
gonna go
anymore,
party.
It's like I'm reminded of that moment in the movie Office Space. If you're, it's like if you're not into evangelizing, if it isn't about trying to bring people to Christ, like, so what is it that you do here then? Like, what is your point? You're a Catholic archbishop. What is it you do? Like, seriously.
Not only is he an archbishop, Josh, I'm going to take you one higher. He was on the list of new cardinals to be created cardinal by Pope Francis in September. So no Archbishop Gomez, but yes, Bishop Aguiar, who is actually just an auxiliary bishop of Lisbon. He's not even but we need two cardinals now in Lisbon, one of which doesn't even believe that the church's mission is to convert people to Christ.
And we still can't have one in L.A.
Exactly.
The biggest Catholic diocese in the United States of America.
Twilight Zone.
First off, two comments here. First off, he's a people person, so there's your answer on what he does. And then, second comment, Erica, the coffee's kicking in.
It is. The coffee is kicking in.
The coffee's kicking in because, while Archibald was a struggle, you nailed that pronunciation, by the way.
Tom.
Great job on. Yeah,
Thank
I just had to point
you.
that out. But
Wow.
So she's good with Spanish names, but not
I can
English
do
names?
Espanol.
Yes. What country are you from?
I'm from New England. Yeah, can you tell?
New England. Yeah. Hello.
And Tom, my love language is words of affirmation. So thank you.
There you go.
I will finish off Twilight Zone happy. Appreciate it.
Look, I got to keep the co-hosts happy. I know that we can't break the band up. We wouldn't want if we're an 80s hair band, we want to break up. We want to keep it together.
Don't be that guy.
But so comments on this. This just, as soon as I heard that, I was like, wait a second. This sounds like a DEI statement from a corporation. And I think that is it just wraps in perfectly. This is perfect because we've just described the two approaches, I think, of evangelization on Catholicism. There's let's challenge young people to do something great and different and to be proud of the challenge that's been presented to them, to make things harder so that it would actually make them want to be proud to be something. And then there's the other approach of, well, let's just lower the barriers, dumb everything down, make it as inclusive, quote unquote, as possible. And this is just a small example of a broader thing going on, I think, within the Catholic Church. So it's kind of interesting to see that so clear in an event that I think a lot of people associate with one of St. Pope John Paul II's greatest accomplishments was just lighting the world on fire with World Youth Day.
Right.
So,
And it comes down to the question of, who do you say that I am, right? Who do you say that Jesus Christ is? Is he the way, the truth, and the life who will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead? And he has given us this time for repentance to receive his mercy? Or do you believe that the most important thing you can do in your life is make everyone feel good? I mean, that's your choice.
Or is Jesus just a guru?
Jesus is a nice guy. Some people think he said good things, others might not, and that's okay. Who do you say that I am? That's the bottom line here. And unfortunately, I think Bishop Aguiar needs to consider it a little harder.
So my Twilight Zone, I have one of my favorite graphics I think I've ever seen made. We have a talented designer, but I don't even think she could have whipped this one
Sorry,
up.
Stark.
So I'm going to put it on the screen right now for the YouTube if you want to check it out. But this is a tweet from MSNBC called "The Far Right's Obsession with Fitness is Going Digital." And it's an opinion piece about why the far right is really into home fitness. And for those who are listening, it is a sweet bicep flex, by the way. It's a sweet bicep flex. And then in the behind, there are people doing the Nazi salute.
It's brown
red.
shirts.
And for those wondering what the article was about, I have some quotes from it that I really, really appreciated. And this, of course, was just roasted up and down on social media. So, quotes, "It appears the far right has taken advantage of pandemic at-home fitness trends to expand its decades-plus radicalization of physical mixed martial arts and combat sports spaces. Physical fitness has always been central to the far right. In Mein Kampf, Hitler fixated on boxing and jiu-jitsu, believing that they could help him create an army of millions whose aggressive spirit and impeccably trained bodies." This is the kicker here. "The intersection of extremism and fitness leans into a shared obsession with the male body, training, masculinity, testosterone, strength, and competition. Physical fitness training, especially in combat sports, appeals to the far right for many reasons. Fighters are trained to accept significant physical pain, to be, quote, warriors, and to embrace messaging around solidarity, heroism, and brotherhood." Imagine that.
You know what, Tom? This is a movement to try to get men off of their lazy boy chairs, stop being in their so-called man caves, watching football for 1,000 hours a week, and getting away from, porn, and just like being true, actual men who love their fellow men, take care of their families, and get in better physical shape instead of being, again, passive about life, being an active participant.
Yeah, it comes back to that.
I applaud.
Did you see the 3 words she chose? Solidarity, heroism, and brotherhood. How long ago was that the standard for what being a man was?
Right.
So, like, being a man,
how are these bad? Like, making it seem like they're bad things.
Why
like
is it far right to be a brother to your fellow men? Yeah.
Masculinity, testosterone, and competition. Like, testosterone's a wonder drug, man. Like, it's what makes men men. This is
actually, testosterone is toxic if men want it, but if women want to become
That's
a man,
fine.
it's suddenly okay, right? The whole
And
trans
no
thing.
problem.
But people like Joe Rogan commented on this, like, oh, so being in shape is far right now, like, awesome. And like, yeah, that's funny. But this struck me for a different reason. The words that were used are words that me personally, I would associate with being a man. So actually this goes deeper than just fitness. This is being a man is far right now. Wanting to be a good man, a good masculine man is far right, which I guess has become the truth, I guess. But it's crazy that they're kind of maligning those things, and those I think are what we need now more than ever. So like, they hate you, right?
Yeah,
I don't understand.
We get certain levels of insanity here. So it's like exercising is far right, and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are racist, and it's like, what are you talking about? I mean, this stuff is so insane.
Insane.
Like, what the left is doing is they're kind of like eating themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes I think the only way we escape the claws of their attacks is just because they turn inward and start attacking their own movement, because like, you're alienating people by being this crazy. And I think that's like the trans movement. They went way too far.
Yeah.
They way too fast.
They went after the kids.
And the backlash.
Kids, yeah.
They went after the
and
kids.
finally, people are waking up and saying, well, wait a minute. Now, this maybe isn't the best thing in the world. But I have to push back at this. First of all, far right? Hitler is not far right. For the love of all the things that are holy, Adolf Hitler was a National Socialist. He wanted the government to take over everything. He did not like the Second Amendment. He didn't want. He would not want Jews to own guns. Are you kidding me? Like, everything about Hitler he's a leftist. He's not a communist. He's just a different type of leftist, socialist type guy. So by the way, and since I'm talking about the guy, he's that's my Twilight Zone for this week. There's a pro-freedom, parents-run organization called Moms for Liberty, and they put in their newsletter a quote by Hitler, talking about how evil this man was, and the quote was saying, talking about how Hitler said, "Whoever owns the youth owns the next gains the future." Right? He alone who owns the youth gains the future, and that was Moms for Liberty were issuing that statement as a clarion call, as a wake-up sign, like, the left is coming for your children. They want to push pornography on your kids with these explicit books and nasty cartoons. You guys need to wake up to what's going on out there. They're coming for our kids. They want to attack their innocence. And so what happened? The left is saying, oh my gosh, this far-right conservative group is quoting Hitler. They must support Hitler. It's It is absolute gaslighting.
It's
they call
bad.
it.
It's the worst bad faith of all time.
It's the absolute total bad faith argument. And the thing that people are starting now to call out on David French. David French, if you don't know,
Tell us.
I'm surprised he wasn't invited to the Senate.
He's an evangelical Christian, and his mantra for the last 6 years has been to attack conservatives at every turn. So much so that the New York Times are like, let's make this guy a columnist. And he dedicates his columnists, he's paid by the New York Times to attack Christian conservatives for every tiny little mistake they make, like every little bit. And he just lets the left go gangbusters and never criticizes them hardly ever at all. And one of the points that David French said is one of the terrible things about conservatives these days is that they just never have the guts to admit that they totally screwed up.
I saw that.
And they never admit that they made a mistake. And they can't they just, well, we can't. His point is that Christian conservatives are afraid to admit failure or that they made a mistake because somehow the left would win. Right? Now, that's actually a point that David French makes I can understand. He's got a good point there. Just like a clock is right twice a day, on that issue, he was right. We need to be a little bit better of saying, okay, hold on a second now. I made a mistake on that and course correct, right? That's fine. That's fine. But he's so big on that point. Conservatives need to admit when they make mistakes. David French attacked Moms for Liberties because they are promoting Hitler.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, dude, you are so wretched and evil and vile. You know better. You know they were quoting this as a warning call, say, hey, they're coming after kids. We have to stop it. So David French is not acting in good faith. Stop acting like he's in good faith. He is a wicked man. Yeah. And I'm going to say it. He is an evil man.
Hilarious.
He knows better.
Hilarious. Because if you were to apply that standard to like CNN, I think every other minute says like, oh yeah, this is fascist like Hitler.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so CNN endorses Hitler. Like that's the dumbest like 5-year-old logic I've ever heard. And he knows it. He knows it.
The only mistake, Moms for Liberty actually said, well, I apologize if people didn't understand what we were getting at. It's like,
they should not have apologized. Right.
If you are quoting Adolf Hitler in a negative light, you should never apologize. The whole point is like, this man is horrible and terrible. This is why
they target your children, because they are like him.
Right.
That is totally legit. They should not have apologized for that. I understand why they did it, but there's just don't back down. Don't back down.
That's an important point too, because like we just talked about, okay, admit when you're wrong, when you're truly wrong. But then if you're not wrong, you shouldn't have to apologize. And this is what the left does to everyone. They try to find every little example that they could possibly find to make you apologize. And it just makes you look so groveling. I can understand why people just never want to apologize. Like the Trumps of the world, like Trump will truly never apologize. Like he hasn't apologized for vaccines. He will never apologize for anything he's ever done. I can see why he's like that, because the left and critics are just so extreme with finding the most minute things and trying to get you to disavow this, say this is wrong.
And they operate in such bad faith because like you can quote Hitler and saying in a bad light, and then they say, oh, now you like Hitler. It's
right.
Like, oh my goodness. It's so... it's hard to have a civil debate in a society where people are allowed to just smear, hate, and defame and accuse the other side. How can we have a discussion with people like this? If we want a country where we, like, hey, there's so much fighting and other stuff and polarization. Like, if you want people to come together and to try to work out the differences and come forward with compromises, we absolutely have to reject these kind of absolute garbage, false attacks, and smearing people when you know that they weren't meaning bad at all. It's wicked and evil.
So that does it for this episode of the Loopcast. Thank you so much for joining. This one was a lot of fun. Ways to help the program: review us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, send us an email, loopcast@catholicvote.org. We want to hear from you. And I'm going to sign us off with Saint Fidelis, Saint Thomas More, and Our Lady of Guadalupe. Pray for us, pray for all the listeners, and we will see you on the next one. Bye, guys.